I'm Josh Corcoran, and these are CJSW Stories. CJSW Stories is a show about the people behind the mic and behind the scenes sharing their stories of making great radio. My guest today is Adam Camus, host of The Failed Pilot, station manager, and chief cook and bottle washer. What brought you to CJSW?
Ooh, interesting question. Well, growing up, I was avidly listening to radio because it was free. And that was in an age where free music didn't really exist in a meaningful way. So hearing interesting programming there, I definitely grew up as a classic rock cat, but slipping a little left of the dial onto CJSW from the classic rock station. I heard tons of weird, interesting music that I'd never heard before. Kind of really coalesced for me though, in the year in between graduating high school and then attending university. I took kind of like a gap year, and I worked a retail job where I would be sent on product shops. Essentially, I would be sitting in my car outside my employer's competition, monitoring how many people went into the competition store and what they walked out with, if anything at all. And that's just essentially a 4 or 5 hour block of me listening to the radio and drinking Slurpees in my car. And I heard the programmers, and I would usually go on like Thursdays and Fridays, and heard the programmers, and it sounded like people that really were interested in some cool music and had interesting stories to tell. I remember programs like the Six Guinness Afternoon or Star Search Rejects and stuff like that really kind of got me interested in doing radio, because it sounded like people just like me doing it. And then I, looking for what I want to do in life, I was like, well, might as well see what this radio business is all about. And I walked in the station and asked about volunteering, and I haven't left since.
Started volunteering in what year?
Well, the first time I walked into the station was December 4th, 1997. I started really volunteering in earnest like spring 1998. And I had my first show by end of summer of 98. And that's kind of when it all started for me. And, I've been pretty much on air except for a couple of years for different reasons. I wasn't on air for the last 25 years.
So when you started, what was the training process like?
Yeah, well, it started out with an orientation. And at that time, CJSW had a staff of 3 people, not a staff of 8, which we have now. Mind you, we weren't really broadcasting online then, and we were a much smaller entity. So, understandably had few resources. But one of those resources we didn't have was a volunteer coordinator. That used to be done by the kind of orientation and what have you was done by volunteers initially. And then, being a student, it afforded opportunities for me to just drop in and process CDs, very similar to what we have now, where students just kind of come on in and do whatever, hang out, do all that kind of stuff. But the on-air training piece was not dissimilar to what we do now. Mind you, we have to do way more now than we had to do way back then in terms of, what kind of knowledge base. And the knowledge base has shifted a little bit now, where, I was just developing or just acquiring my first records for my record collection at that point. But I didn't really have a turntable to spin them. So I learned how to do that here and through my broadcast training. And then it was on a show called Miscellaneous Debris. I did this training with Cam Hayden, who was a programmer here Monday nights 11 till midnight, and it was great. And I learned so much about what you could do on this station and how you can push the envelope and how you can challenge listeners and all that kind of fun stuff that we now is so important for us to kind of keep in focus. But also learned all these kind of technologies that have served me well throughout. I'm glad I learned how to set up a turntable properly by learning how to do that here and stuff like that. But the training was the same 4-week period, but it is it has changed substantially in terms of what things are being considered. Like there was no digital media other than our mini disc players that we used to play for ads. And I think I joined the station not too long after mini discs were adopted, replacing the old carts, which were like 8-track cassette players, which was how ads and pre-recorded content was run. And we could only run certain lengths of pre-recorded content too. You know, all the radio was live at that point.
CJSW has seemed to open a lot of doors for you in your life, whether that be learning new music or things like that. So, what other doors did it open for you?
Excellent question. This is something I often relay to new volunteers, especially about, you know, with volunteers that might be coming to CJSW where they may not actually know radio too much or be so familiar with it. And, you know, like, what's the benefit to me? And it's like one of those things when I joined, the doors that opened was like a whole new world of friends, like graduating out of high school. Like you're at a very interesting point in life where you're not with the people you've been with for the last 12 years by no choice of your own, to the world of being an adult where you get to make your own decisions and make your own way in life and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, certainly the door it opened was like a whole world of new experiences and friends and a different world. Like I knew I wanted to be involved with music because I think it's cool. And, you know, through here at CJSW, there was a great opening there because, you know, within our membership, there are so many expert music lovers, music industry professionals, musicians, period, which the net result is like being connected with different job opportunities. Like I've had 2 job opportunities kind of come up in my life that have been great for me, that came almost directly through CJSW, like personal relationship. I met someone here and we dated for a while here, found bandmates here. Like it's a cool little hive of humanity that also does radio on the side, you know? So like this place attracts very talented, thoughtful folks. And I was fortunate enough to connect with a lot of those people and learn from them on a professional level, and then in an informal level, like just learn music. And, you know, sometimes that doesn't necessarily require direct dialogue, but is something that's our broadcast does so well, is you don't necessarily have to be in the same room with that programmer, but when you're listening, you know, like, and having an expert or someone who knows what they're talking about drop a hot new track or some sort of deep cut that you'd never heard before, like that's part of the education that I received. And I know that's one that probably most listeners of our station receive daily.
You've come back to CJSW so many years later, and you are now the station manager. What's that like for you?
Oh, interesting. I guess we're kind of coming with a working career. Like, you know, once I was done all my schooling, I had a degree that there's no clear path towards employment on. So I found what I wanted to do myself. I worked in a bar for a number of years, and then worked at the National Music Center as an event coordinator. Then I came here in 2017 as station manager. Like, in a weird way, I don't feel like I've ever left, and I've always had a connection here, even when I moved away to live in Vancouver and I was going to try and start a business there, and that didn't work out. And I came back here, and like the week I came back to town, I got a call from the program director at the time, Joe Burima, saying like, "Hey, do you want your old time slot back?" I was like, yes, I do. So like, you know, I don't know how to extract myself from this place, but here I am. And, you know, I don't necessarily feel like I've ever been away, but I will say that, you know, the difference between being a volunteer and then becoming a staff member is different. Like your relationships change, and responsibilities and how you're perceived and viewed or understood changes and what have you. And that's to be expected, you know, when you are at a leadership position at a place like this, where people sustain this place through their passion and efforts and what have you. And then, you know, when you actually are in a position where you help folks realize those dreams or whatever, or deal with the problems that they do have with the organization, it's a different sort of relationship with the station and the people in it that I think has to happen a little bit, especially for someone who spent the first 80% of their association with the organization as a volunteer. It does change a little bit.
swing back towards the music scene in Calgary, and I'm wondering what sort of effect you think CJSW has had on the music scene in Calgary.
Yeah, that's a great one. Um, well, I also I'm speaking as someone who wears many hats. Like I'm also a member of the Calgary music scene. I've been a musician and DJ in the scene as long as I've been musician longer than I've been here at CJSW, but DJ certainly as a result of me being a part of CJSW. And in terms of what it does for the scene, it's quite important and now more than ever. So when I joined the station, there was like a lot of mirrors for the scene, as it were, meaning areas where the scene could be reflected in a way that would open up to the public. There was like Fast Forward magazine or Beetroot or any of the publications that exist, but CJSW has always been an important part of that galaxy. Now CJSW is essentially the last entity standing where Calgary musicians can hear their music broadcast to a wider audience and have the legitimacy of our broadcast and the interest there, and the cascading effect of that is like, well, festivals, when they start booking their and bar owners and stuff like that start booking their stuff, they consult us, they ask about us, whether it's actively, and when we'll get notes from certain festivals saying like, hey, do you want to set up a listening committee of your volunteers that like this kind of music to help us collate and curate a festival? It's like, sure. But it also happens passively when people look at our charts. I mean, and our programmers are self-directed in what they play. So everything you hear on air is there's an intentionality behind it. It's people like it for some reason. And, it's something we pride ourselves in, is having that local focus. It's an unofficial sort of requirement that all programmers have, is like keeping 10% of their set local, which is great because that is a direct, point of action to kind of get local music broadcast to the community that we serve. So like, now I got a question for you. And to flip it around a little bit, what would our local scene be like if there wasn't a CJSW?
That would probably be very small and very limited, because CJSW has such a great reach, whether that be on the FM dial or in podcast format or over the internet. I mean, you have an audience of the entire world because we have the podcasting and because we have, a live feed that people can listen to on the internet. So I think CJSW has helped the music scene succeed more than most.
Yeah, I concur. And I would also extend that sort of support to scenes beyond just the music scene. Like I look at progressive culture, like CJSW had the first female broadcaster in Calgary on this station like a zillion years ago. We have the first LGBTQ plus programming in town. We've had the first Indigenous radio hosts in town on our station. Like we're kind of the tip of the spear for progress, and that the residual effect for the city is good. It actually is changing the city into kind of being the, inclusive, fun paradise that we all want it to be. But, like that needs things like CJSW to do the work day in, day out, reaching people that may not understand, get, or whatever what we do, but appreciate it. But, and that's that residual effect over the last 40 years in our city. And I'm a born and raised Calgarian, and I've seen it and heard how this station has changed this town, whether directly or indirectly. It's a very, very cool entity to have, especially in a city that ostensibly is fairly conservative and also fairly transient too. It's Calgary's like a port city, and we get new ideas and brought in and what have you, and those kind of find their way up to CJSW because we do have an interesting space where people can use this platform to kind of share their thoughts and feelings on any number of topics.
Speaking of spaces, now we do have a live band room we have a band room. We have bands on quite frequently. Do you think that has, I guess it goes back to what you were saying earlier about the impact that if a local band has a chance to play on CJSW, that'll open doors for them. Uh, have you seen that happen or?
Yeah, I would say so. Our live performances are an amazing way for our listeners to kind of get exposure to music that may not be accessible to them, and not necessarily in a sounds type of accessibility, but like if you live in like Mackenzie Town, you're not going to the Palomino every weekend to see what's going down because no one has $130 to spend on Ubers, you know. But by virtue of the fact we have that space where you can hear local performers and performers from around the world on our station, not only does it help promote like the festivals, venues, and events that are happening in town, but on a band level, it's giving you like a live off the floor recording experience, broadcast to 20 to 30,000 people at any given time. You get MP3s of your performance doing it, which are great for like festival submissions, especially if you're like in between recording sessions. If you do a session here to use for a festival submission package, all the better. And we've augmented our live bands on broadcast with video capture as well. And you see it happen a few weeks or months after any one band performs here, you get a live video out of it, which is incredibly helpful on a band level to help get bookings. We live in an age now where write-ups don't necessarily cut the mustard anymore because no one reads anymore. That might be an oversimplification, but I guess the thing I'm trying to say is people prefer watching what they would be getting if they were to book that band. And that we have a setup here where we're able to kind of create that space where normally for a band, it's like, okay, well, are we going to save up like $1,500, $2,000 to make a video? Or are we going to try for this AFA grant or whatever, to kind of make it happen? Where here it's more or less drop us a line, let us know when you have something special coming up that you want to really promote. We'll do our damnedest to get you on air and on YouTube.
I know that there are many people out there listening to this right now and hearing your great story and saying, hey, I really want to get involved. What sort of advice would you give to those listeners who are thinking they're right on the edge? They want to come in, they might be a little nervous. What's your perfect advice? Or what's your one single bit of advice you would give them?
Okay, well, I'm going to give a couple pieces of advice because I think, there's a couple different elements that are handy to know. Is this volunteer opportunity, like any volunteer opportunity, is a sort of phenomenon that you get as much out of it as you put in. So like if you are interested in like learning sound, well, we have opportunities to learn how to do sound engineering here. Make the time to do it. Come in, grind. It's an okay place to make mistakes with that too. Because everyone here is learning at their own rate. I've been doing radio for 25 years and I still feel like I'm learning different things all the time. It's something I try to incorporate into the broadcast. I always strive to be better in that regard. The other thing is, be prepared to have a lot of fun. It's a really, really cool place. On the ground, when you first start, you start out with an orientation. Then it's a graduated process where you then get training on production software, like how we are recording this thing right now. And then from there, you can learn how to do audio engineering. We're starting to get into video editing as a training option. There's like event management. There's all sorts of different things. And then as soon as you have enough proverbial dirt underneath your fingernails here, meaning you have a little bit of experience, we get you program trained and learn how to do radio here. And that kind of arc can take as quick as 2 months, or it can take as long as a year. But it all depends on a number of factors. The biggest one is how much time you're willing to put in. The second one being just other stuff. It was hard to recruit people during COVID and stuff, but be patient with it, and be interested, and be curious. Being curious, especially when it comes to the music piece, is so helpful. I came in to CJSW having just worked at a record store for a year before I started volunteering here, and I thought I knew everything about music. And then I came here and realized you were a baby in a land of giants. There's so much to learn here, from conversations with, other volunteers, staff, and programmers and the like, or just going through the record library. Like you have to be, I think it really, really behooves the curious out there to come volunteer here, because you'll be richly rewarded. There's new stuff I find all the time that just keeps me coming back. I love the fact that, there's always A, new music coming out, and B, always old archival music I never heard before that I think is really, really cool. So yeah, ask questions, be curious.
COVID was a giant thing that came along and really messed people up. What sort of impact does CJSW have for you? And what sort of impact, well, it's a two-part question. What sort of impact do you think we had on the listeners out there in the world?
Definitely, March of 2020 was no picnic for anyone. But for us, it was really an interesting time. We had pretty much like a day or two to figure out whether or not we would shutter the station and figure out some sort of pre-recorded broadcast solution, or would we kind of open things up and, kind of just be very, very cautious about how things go and, play it by ear. Now, we are part of the Emergency Broadcast Network. So I'll get on the technical requirements we have. We're part of this Emergency Broadcast Network, and as such, we can't really go off air without repercussion and penalty. That's one thing. But going into this pandemic when you were hearing, it was almost like this tidal wave that was coming of bad news of like, oh, well, Italy's totally shut down. It's bad. Oh, it sounds like, everything's getting shut down in New York or whatever. And, when it came to us and when we had that time, I gotta say, we decided to kind of keep the station open. It was something I with my staff at the time, I said that this is what we would be doing. Why? Well, because I realized we'd be going into a time where we would have people at home, people that might be alone, people might be isolated, people that might be starved for routine, people that might, love to hear what we do, because they have no other choice of doing things, or they have a galaxy of choices and they're bored with those, and they'll come to us because we're always unique each and every day. It was a tough decision because not everyone was on board with it. But I see the purpose of this station as being here for not only good times, but also for the bad times. And, that's one of the reasons why I was very emphatic about getting that, and jump the gun on a lot of supply gathering. I spent the first month of pandemic driving around town looking for hand sanitizers and all that kind of fun stuff, as so many people were. But the net result is, in terms of the impact and importance, is we were one of the few things that were still running more or less as usual. Mind you, we did, at the height of, I think, the first wave, we had about 40% of our programmers submitting pre-recorded programs. And that was a huge process in itself, teaching dozens of people pretty much overnight how to make radio at home, as some folks elected to do it. But as the whole thing, the whole pandemic situation evolved, we evolved with it. As soon as it was kind of determined that oh yes, air filtration is where it's at, we got air filtration systems in right away. We tried to keep our space as safe as possible. That being said, we also wanted to kind of do what we do and be that community mirror and community voice during this really stressful time for our community, and certainly the global community. But we're mostly accountable to the folks that live in town here, and we were that entity that was still doing what we do. And that that is kind of an embodiment, at least in my way of thinking, of why this station has received so much love and support over the years, is because, like, no, it's legit. We're here, day in, day out doing the thing, which I hope was appreciated. And I guess, like, looking on more empirical terms, like, I know our online listenership during the first year and a half of COVID was about three and a half times larger than what it had been pre-pandemic. So we got on new listeners. We've made new friends. We have friends in Ohio now. We have friends in Iowa. We have a bunch of folks that we connected to our station during the pandemic, just because A, we were doing it live, and B, we were actually a real voice doing it, which is kind of cool. And that has actually spawned some interesting relationships between, like, programmers and people that text in from hundreds, if not thousands of miles away, which is kind of a cool thing. And that's kind of really embodies what this place is all about.
Well, okay, that just reminds me of something I completely forgot. CJSW has recently released an app. What was that like for you, and what sort of impact do you hope that it will have?
Great question. In the last decade or so, the radio has been faced with the same sort of dilemma I think print media had 20, 25 years ago, when what happens when the digital world is overtaking your traditional format, business model, whatever. And the app was, in a weird way, in my view, like, we redeveloped our website in 2014, and it's an awesome website, and it still holds up very, very well today. With the amount of traffic we have 3+ months of audio content available at the touch of a button there. So we had the bones already there. And now we're in a spot where we're on the University of Calgary campus, and we have 18 to 23-year-olds coming into our station looking to volunteer that have never heard of radio, but they know what a podcast is. They've never engaged with, like, FM at all, but they know what YouTube does and all that kind of stuff. So, like, in the kind of goal to keep relevant, not only through programming, but how people engage with programming is incredibly important. And, the app was an initiative that we did during the pandemic to kind of, like, future-proof CJSW as much as it can in terms of, like, being relevant to upcoming generations of listeners. Because, it's an observable phenomenon. If you went to the food court right now here on campus and asked, like, hey, how many hours of radio do you listen to a week? You would be met with blank stares. It's like, no, I listen to Spotify on my phone. It's like, well, if everyone's engaging with their phone is their media hub, we need to be there too. And CJSW.com is an immensely mobile-friendly way of engaging on any digital device. An app is just like a nice sort of easy, clean, one-stop means of engaging with the app and the content. And the app is kind of structured to be a lot like a Netflix experience or something like that, where you can favorite things or, like, recommended to you lists and thematic kind of lists. So it's kind of going with, like, how people consume radio too. For instance, my partner, she loves Stefan Lewis's show Knotted Roots, which is excellent R&B show that's on every Sunday from 3 to 4 p.m. She'll binge listen to, like, 4 or 5 episodes in a row. And that's a consumer or change where, still I like listening to temporal radio. I like tuning into Tuesday night at 7 p.m. to hear Tombstone After Dark when I'm making dinner and stuff like that, because, like, that's just part of how I like to live my life. But just seeing how others and upcoming folks are consuming media, it's like, this is a more accessible and more relevant way than maybe the FM broadcast is. We'll always have the FM piece, but we have to broaden that further to kind of be relatable and accessible to folks.
My guest today was Adam Camus, current station manager. Thank you for listening to CJSW Stories. I'm Josh Corcoran.